This is the Chapter 2 segment for outline. In the beginning of the segment starts with a discussion about how psychological measures should be both reliable and valid. So this is a very crucial issue for all sciences, not just psychology, that experiments and tests are both reliable and valid, and a good measurement tool is both of these qualities. So reliability means the degree to which your measurement tool procedure is consistent, repeatable results. So it means if it's repeated, you are going to get the same results, and this lets you know that the test is reliable. And validity means the extent to which a test actually measures the trait it is intended to measure. In a test, are we actually looking at the question we are proposing? Is this a reliable and good indicator into what we actually want to look into, what variables we want to look at? So this is especially important in psychology compared to other sciences because most psychological processes cannot be directly observed. So one way to do this is developing a good psychological test, which is a way of measuring a psychological event or process. And the book describes examples such as love, memory, intelligence, or personality. Now, the second main topic is that psychologists strive to avoid bias by withholding information. There's a lot of different biases that everybody has as human beings, but the one bias that psychologists are most worried about when conducting studies is unconscious bias. And this is also called implicit bias, and it's an inclination to prefer one kind of person, object, or idea over others without being consciously aware of that preference. So most psychologists agree that all human judgments are biased, and the only way to prevent humans from displaying an unconscious bias is the bias favoring a particular characteristic is to withhold that information from them. So the book provides the example of the orchestra auditions where conductors of an orchestra may have a preference over male musicians, but if they do a blind audition process, in that way they are withholding that information from them. This is a way to overcome that unconscious bias based on sex. One area where withholding information is even more important than trying to go against biases is in the testing of medicine. And one way of doing this is placebos. Now, placebo effects are pretty commonly known. It's used in a lot of medication studies. But the best way to test a medication, and the book really emphasizes this, is a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. So randomized means that whoever gets the actual medicine treatment, who gets the placebo pill, is random. It's not favoring one particular group over another. Double-blind means that the people going into the study that are receiving the medication, they do not know whether they are receiving the active medication or the placebo, which is most commonly a sugar pill. Why it is a double-blind is that the doctors themselves also don't know which patient is getting what. They do not know what medicine they are giving. And this eliminates any type of bias that a practitioner might have in their treatment, depending on which patient is receiving what information. And placebo-controlled is just a way to see if the medicine works and to try and see if there is a placebo effect. Now, the last subject area that the book talks about in this section is that there are standards of ethical conduct in human and animal experimentation. And the example they first start off talking with is the Tuskegee syphilis study. So this was a study that lasted 40 years in the early part of the 20th century, and it was a study in which the U.S. Public Health Service and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention followed the progression of syphilis in hundreds of poor African American men in Tuskegee, Alabama, without providing them with a known cure for the disease. When the details of the study came to light to the public, it was a scandal for how unethical these scientists were treating this obvious it was a scandal for how they were treating this infringed group, these minority people, and how they were abusing them. They were treating them unethically. And in response to that, there have now been lots of ethical developments in order to make sure that there is a review process, and there's a lot of steps people have to go through in order to do research with humans. So one of the most popular ones is the Institutional Review Board, or the IRB, and it's a group of individuals convened by an institution to ensure studies involving humans meet ethical standards. And one important factor of any human study that is required by IRBs is that there is informed consent. So this is a process of informing participants in a study about what they'll be doing and any risk they face, then getting their active agreement beforehand. So there's no way of tricking people or getting them into something that could potentially harm them, or anything of that sort. Then the book also mentions the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, and this is a group that must review and approve the proposed research before any research with animals can begin. And this is another ethical protection, that we are not abusing animals and we are not treating them unfairly or unethically. And the review process for any of these two institutions is typically a multi-step process. It is very rare that a proposal is approved the first time someone submits it. It's usually a long review process, and a lot of revisions are made to a researcher's proposal.